had this idea to walk backwards every day for 40 days in a row here in July, August, and a little bit of September 2024. I used to walk backwards almost every single day since the pandemic for several years. And what's going to happen is every single day I'm going to record my thoughts and feelings that's going on for me in real time about the creative process or whatever else comes up for these 40 days. And you're going to hear, maybe 5 to 7 minutes per day of the best of recorded during that live walking backwards for about a quarter to a half of a mile per day. And it's in real time. So I'm really walking backwards as I'm talking with you outside. So enjoy the whole episode, and here we go. Good morning. It is Monday, August 12th, 2024, day 17. We're moving along here. The midpoint is just days away. 2 lovely dogs and their walker just came by, which is something I'm noticing today. I'm noticing that the few people that I encounter are either people walking their dogs or people that have dressed in a certain way that tells me that they're running, exercising, working out. So it's almost like the outfit is signaling that this is exercise. And then with the people walking their dogs, clearly they're walking their dogs. Everyone has a purpose. Everyone has a meaning, something that they're doing other than what they're doing, so that what they're doing is actually secondary. That puts us in a place where to be where we are doing what we're doing becomes the exception, becomes a barrier in a way to just being here now. If I'm walking my dog, then my attention is on walking my dog. If he's doing some sort of, I'm doing some obedience training, making the dog become more obedient. If I'm only there to make sure he does his business, and I want to make sure that he has his pooping, that he gets his exercise in, that there's something other than what I'm doing that will take the attention. Now, what I'm doing is actually walking my dog, but the going for a walk in the morning is secondary. That's just where I need to do it. And then the same thing with exercise. If I'm going out to exercise in the morning, then I'm exercising, and then where I'm doing it just happens to be outside. To intentionally do what I'm doing when I'm doing it, and only that, where that has my exclusive focus of attention, is a rare thing in this world. I can think of a few activities that people do that are doing it just to do it. Like tending your garden would be one approach. Like tending your garden would be one activity where you're there to tend your garden and you're actually tending your garden. The other one is making a meal. Is actually a rarity in our world, because usually we're making a meal, we're preparing food for the purpose of eating at a specific time, doing the meal so that I can go back to work at lunch or dinner. It is a rare experience in our culture today to do the thing that we're doing while we're doing it without any agenda, feeling of expectation, any feeling of first this, then that. In the creative work, I would call this depth of entry. So if I were to do the example of a guy walking his dogs, because he's not actually going for a walk, he's actually walking his dogs. And he's not actually walking his dogs, he's actually some combination of exercising them and getting them out to go to the bathroom. And we call it walking your dog. Giving them a little bit of exercise because it becomes a barrier in a way to just being here now. If I'm walking my dog, then my habitat, and so living in an apartment, in a condo, and so we give them walks. The other thing I'm working with is dropping my own expectation of having to talk with you about anything today, and notice that I didn't notice anything that was interesting or compelling or striking, and dropping the expectation of something of that ilk to be shared, which is a way of going into the nothingness. It's an entering point to more nothing, or 0 point, or just being with what is and working with what's in front of me. And working with what's in front of me could be nothing. I could have nothing in front of me, so I'd work with that, and I'd work with a lot of nothingness, but a lot of nothingness. Just like the balconies. The balconies in this area, most of them are empty. A few of them have some furnishings, and since walking in this area since the pandemic, both in mornings and evening times, I have yet to see anyone on any balcony. Seeing someone here that's now part of my tribe, my morning tribe, a gentleman who's actually just going for a walk, which is interesting. He is not wearing a workout outfit, and he is not walking with dogs. He's just going for a walk. And as I describe it, I even say he is just going for a walk. Singular, just. Slight minimization too. Just. It's just for me. I often notice that people who use "it's just for me" as a way to minimize what it is they're wanting, making it so that it's less important because it's just for me. If it was somehow for that person and someone else, then they would say it's for two of us. And sometimes people say it's just for the two of us, implying that there's something that's less important, less. There's an implication that if there was someone else involved, that you would get something a little bigger, something a little nicer. But, it's just for me. It's just for the two of us. At a certain point, though, if you take this to the end, it's very interesting, because you wouldn't say, well, it's just for my church. It's just for all the members of my church. You would never minimize it like that. Well, it's just for the president of our CEO. You would never minimize it like that. And if you did, it would be ironic, of course. It's just for. That's an interesting thing to listen for today. And those words, it's just for, that's the tip of the iceberg, as they say. That's the indicator of that feeling, because whether I say those exact words or that turn of phrase or not, listen for that energy being there, the energy of minimizing the person, minimizing yourself, minimizing the relationship. And it's an energy, and that energy gets commonly expressed with those words, but it's not the only expression. And it's the ripple effect, the seen ripple effect of that perspective that exists without a person saying those words. Good morning. Today is August 13th, day 18, 2024. Wow, 2 days away from being at the halfway mark. And today something super fun came up. So for the last 18 days, 2-3 of the times I've noticed this guy, and he's an anomaly. Well, first of all, because it's 6 in the morning. Second of all, he has a very distinctive look. Third of all, he and I are the ones without dogs or without the running outfits on. And as I rounded a corner, he passed me, and it was definitely earlier than I've ever seen him before. So that's curious. And today was also the closest I had ever been to him by proximity, physical proximity. And the duration of our encounter was no more than 3 to 5 seconds. And in those 3 to 5 seconds, I had a snapshot feeling of him. Like the whole history of his character came through, and I could feel it. He's not only is he East Coast, he's definitely from somewhere in the city of New York. He definitely worked in some sort of, or does work in some kind of finance job where he deals mostly with paperwork and numbers. A bunch of things came through in just a couple of seconds. And isn't that true with all of us? Isn't that true that if we can be sensitive enough and aware enough and in the moment enough, that we could sense someone's entire history? And this is a character, from a character point of view, from developing a character and being a character, writing a character, expressing a character. Because most of the characters we write will be real people, and those real people have real histories, and those real histories are part of who we are or who we used to be. And the fragment or the fractal of that history is there. I'm thinking of a few people that I follow on social media, and they talk about certain aspects of their history, and it shows up in their behavior. In fact, this is not a character trait as such, but this is behaviorally, and behavior does lead to character traits, by the way. I made a choice of this one character I was playing. I made the choice that this character most likely juggled. Not that he juggled like professional juggler, but that he juggled as a part of his skill sets. So I went out and learned to juggle, because I knew that in this one scene where he walks through his kitchen and there's a bowl of fruit on the table, that he needed to have the potential of juggling. It wasn't called for in the script. There was no mention of it in the script. It was a feeling I had. So I went out and learned to juggle, because even if I didn't juggle in the show, how I picked up that piece of fruit would be different. How I handled the object would be different. And that's true of everyone, everywhere, no matter what you do. If I'm a painter and I pick up a pair of chopsticks, I'm going to pick those chopsticks up slightly differently than someone who's not a painter. So the history of the character is not necessarily in the past. Another one that I'll never forget that I saw a clip of a guy who was at the World Championship of poker players, and those poker games can go on for hours, if not days. So the championship was going on for days, if not a week or longer. And finally, this guy wins. So he's declared the winner, some, $20-30 million pot of money. And he barely lifted his arm above his shoulder and gave sort of like a mini kind of fist pump, like, yeah. But his face didn't change. And I'm like, wow. That's the price of entry for that game at that level. The price of entry is that you don't give any tells. You don't give any leaks. You don't give any expression of the cards you're holding and how you feel. That's a really interesting price to pay to be a champion of that game. Which then asks or begs the question, which comes first? The person who doesn't want to or doesn't like to or doesn't need to or refrains for some reason of expression of thought and feelings, and that's why that person's attracted to the game of poker? Or is it the other way around? Is it that they have no proclivity, but they earnestly develop that skill, that trait? And that's one of the beautiful things for the artist, for the creative, is making those choices, making those delineations. Is it innate to the character, or is it something that comes out of a need in the life of the character? For instance, part of the work I share a lot is getting to know yourself. And one of the many ways to get to know yourself is to do all of these readings of destiny cards and astrology and Mayan calendar and Enneagram and so forth, numerology. And if you start doing all of those kind of insight disciplines, you start to see themes emerge about your innate skill sets and how you might tend to express yourself. And one of mine is being really good with my hands and verbally expressive. So today I shared with you, as I walk backwards, about how I learned to juggle. Some would say, well, that was actually inevitable. You just found a project to bring that forward. The other thing about all the ways of getting to know myself is that I am someone who's a communicator, and here I am talking into a recording device so that I can share my thoughts and feelings. And then there's the skill sets that I work on that are not native to me that also, I am sure, show up in my character. Because it all starts with that thing of being very sensitive and very aware of that first brush. So we get this opportunity all the time. It's so funny, we do this with breeds of dogs, and we're very comfortable doing a profile on those, but less comfortable doing it with a human being. Lots of bird activity today. What I'm a huge advocate for is the care and feeding of your creative self. Getting to know yourself so well, with such detail, with such nuance, with such love, with such kindness, with such intention to be the absolute best steward of yourself, of your creative self, of your entirety of yourself, for all of the aspects of it. Really get into the care and feeding of you with an awareness of the limitations, self-sabotaging, along with the ideal and the nurturing and the best practices. It's so funny. We learn about best practices in our business life, but do we learn best practices in our personal and creative life? That's something I will advocate for you. Thank you. So it is August 14th, 2024, and it's day 19, and the eucalyptus tree is there. I left about 1 minute later than I usually leave, and if it was a day or two ago, as I rounded the corner, this was a day or two ago, I met that guy, and that started a whole riff. And today, I turned the corner, I rounded that corner, which is in front of this hotel, and just as I rounded it, there was a guy coming around the corner about 10-12 feet away, and at the same time there's a driveway, and there was a guy pulling up in a white Volvo, clearly looking for something. The part that continually fascinates me is that all three of us converge at this one particular point, which is really a choke point in a sense. Like when I'm rounding the corner, he's coming his way, there is no time and there is no space in that area to adjust, so it's not so close. So we have like feet to navigate. And then of course the car coming up to the driveway also makes it even more tight because it's now in the driveway. I feel like it's a situation where something has literally drawn us together. So the timing that it takes for all three of us to be at that longitude and latitude. Oh yeah, that's something else I was fascinated about. But the timing it takes for all three of us to be at that exact same longitude and latitude at that exact moment in time and space is astounding. It's tantamount to a kind of natal chart in astrology. And it's like, yep, that's the snapshot. That's what happened at that moment on that day. But what is important is the noticing. When situations like that arise, I often look left or right or far ahead or behind, just as a way to notice and appreciate even more what it would take for that to happen. So it's not like there was a stream of people walking. Obviously it's 6 a.m. It's not like there was a stream of cars happening because there was no other car on, in either direction. And you can check this out in your daily life. Is if you're in a culture where you have right-hand side drive, so you're driving up a street and you turn right onto a side street, and sometimes there'll be a pedestrian. There is no one walking within eyesight in either direction on that sidewalk, just the person who's walking on the sidewalk, who's now stepping off the curb into the street to walk across the street at the exact same time I'm turning right. And so I pause, obviously. Good idea. But the timing involved is amazing. Me turning right and that person walking across the street at that exact moment, at that exact place. It's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. And it could be one of those things where the more you are aware of it, the more you perhaps either create it, or it could be just a simple noticing. And this is something that I've been working with, noticing, aware of since 9-10 years old. I would ride my bicycle down to a street corner about a mile away that had an intersection where there was no possibility of it being influenced by a light, a signal, a traffic light. In other words, it was miles away, because I lived out in a rural area. It was miles away from a traffic signal, because a traffic signal creates an artificial constriction and a release of cars. It's not natural, right? So it's outside of the rhythm. So this particular intersection was, like I said, at least from a traffic signal, it was miles with an S. It was several miles away from any traffic signal. And it was an intersection that was unique. It was like a T-square. One car would have a stop sign, and the other car would have a continual driving experience. Like they didn't have to stop because there's no stop sign. And so you had no artificial or required stop, except for the one on the corner. Hang out there, watch half hour at a time, just to see how many times that energy attracted energy, that at the exact same time there was a person who stopped at the stop sign, that another car would be driving by, so they would actually have to stop or pause another moment or two before the other car passed. Just like the intersection that just happened with me this morning, the three of us. And I recall it being around 70% of the time, 7 times out of 10, that someone would stop at the stop sign. It's as if that would trigger another car to come around the corner so that they'd have to meet each other. And that one car would have to pause. Energy attracting energy. There's a sensitivity to the timing, and that sensitivity may or may not be with the individual, but that sensitivity to timing and rhythm and being in flow. I had the experience of being a minute behind in getting out the door today. What I didn't know was that the timing was being set up for me to have that experience. If I had left at the preordained time, then that experience wouldn't have happened. Not in that way. It couldn't have. It's one thing to say this about leaving to go walk backwards at 6 a.m. and it's a completely different thing to say this about your whole life or your career or your romantic life, etc. If it's true in the micro, it has to be true in the macro because it's nature, and nature works with replication. And this is something that, while I've noticed this for a very long time, and I really enjoy seeing it play out, when I notice it, really lovely. I feel the weather a little different today. It's a little bit cooler, which is lovely. And by cooler, I mean Southern California. And it's not the change that happens as we get closer to the fall equinox. It's just a little bit of reprieve. Okay, you're not going to believe this. It happened again. I'm walking across the street, no cars in any direction. And it was 2 gray cars and myself all coming to that same intersection at the exact same moment. One gray car was doing some weird job of backing up into a parking spot, parking in a red zone, by the way. The other one was stopping at the stop sign to make a right next to where the car was parking in the red zone, and me. And of course, both cars had to alter their rhythm while I passed because I was at the intersection at the exact same time. I would love it. Nothing would make me happier than if you could send me a note of any noticings that you have. First of all, you have to have the intention. Second of all, you have to notice the noticing when it happened. And third of all, you would need to send me that note. So I know it's a lot to ask. I know it's big. And if you do, it would make my day. And I would be so appreciative. And then also how you feel about it. Like, how do you feel about it when you notice it? What do you notice about the significance or non-significance of it? I would be endlessly appreciative. Thank you so much for coming by. Wow, we made it. Today's the halfway mark, August 15th, 2024. It's a Thursday, and it's day 20. So this is a milestone, as they say. Milestones and gravestones, right? Markers. Just markers. And markers are completely arbitrary. They're just made up. We give it significance because we have 5 fingers, and 5 fingers on the other hand, and 2 sets of 5 toes. And so we're like, hey, 20. And this thing of me even saying halfway is, illusory. It's just giving meaning to something, which is fine, but it's good to recognize that it's made up. But what isn't made up is how I feel, and that's the state of being, and that's what we talk about a lot here, state of being, because how I show up is everything. What I bring, let's slow that down, what I bring to the present is the present, and it's time for my eucalyptus tree. Inhale. What I bring my awareness, I bring my noticing. When I bring my noticing and I bring my awareness, that creates my present. So it doesn't make a difference if it's day 1 or day 10 or day 20, because all that other stuff is made up. It's always, as they say, day 1. Every day is day 1. And if we take that to our creative process, if we take that to our storytelling, then we would match that up with the event. We would match that up with the person showing up for work, the person showing up for their anniversary, the person showing up for school, the person showing up for their partner's birthday, showing up to a friend's wedding, showing up to their wedding, because it's showing up to the airport, showing up for a grand adventure. It's always the state of being of the character that will have the most influence or the most impact over what's about to take place. The first date, the last date, or the first date as the last date, Again, all made up, but super fun for the art of story. The state of being has a direct impact with my point of view that I come to that particular day, that particular event with. How I'm thinking and how I'm feeling has everything to do with my state of being. For instance, this morning my state of being was, whoa, this is early. Here we go again. My state of being was, I'm tired. Here I am, and this is getting challenging. So I was feeling a little repetitious. I was feeling a little over it. I was feeling a little constricted. I was feeling mostly tired, I think. Last night I went to an event, and by the time I came back and did all the things I needed to do after the event, a theater experience, it was like 1 a.m. when I got to bed. And, it's 6 a.m. now, so I understand that. And that's my state of being. So it went that way a little bit as I was coming up to my intersection and then going into walking backwards as I am now and allowing all that is. And the allowing state shifts my point of view and my state of being to some degree. But the moment I did an inhale of my eucalyptus trees, check that out, my eucalyptus trees. As soon as I had that first inhale of that beautiful eucalyptus tree that greets me every morning, I shifted. This is all a big game of self-discovery for both you and for your characters. If you can make these discoveries for yourself, then you're going to have more autonomy, more resilience, more awareness, more dexterity. If you do this kind of work for your characters will have more self-awareness, your characters will have more self-knowledge, your characters will be richer, fuller human beings, and they'll have more humanity. Isn't that interesting? I mean, isn't that what we want? And isn't that interesting? A more human, one with more humanity. That can't be a bad thing. And then as a creative, to take your character and sculpt your character with those kinds of awarenesses and to be able to have the dexterity to dial them up or dial them back or have the antithesis of that character one way so that you can grow your character in 90 pages or 120 pages or 250 pages or 1 tableau or 10 tableaus, still frames, whatever medium you work in. To be able to do that as part of your creative process can only help you. I use Ebenezer Scrooge from A Christmas Carol as a classic example because most cultures know this narrative. In fact, the character is so iconic that the English language adopted the word Scrooge, meaning, he's a real Scrooge, meaning he's a real tightwad or cheap or frugal, financially closed person, cheapskate. We say, oh yeah, that person's a real Scrooge, meaning they don't share their money or they're very tight with their money. And it comes from A Christmas Carol because that was the character's last name, Ebenezer Scrooge, right? And so for that one, you only look at the first couple minutes of that narrative and you see how incredibly constricted he is around money and time. And of course his job is accounting or bookkeeping, so he counts everything, which doubles down on his character trait. And then at the end of the narrative, the character needs to go to the opposite or the other end of that spectrum, which is incredibly warm-hearted and generous. But the only way we as the audience can appreciate his generosity of helping Tiny Tim and giving everyone gifts and purchasing a dinner for 20, 30, 40 people for Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. The only way we can appreciate that full way is if the character had started off in the opposite place. So it might be a good idea to take a look at your life, self-reflect. If you don't want to do it for yourself, do it for your character. Either you, the character of the writer, or you, the character you're creating. And look at the beginning of your narrative and see where the constrictions are, where the tightness is, where the resistance is, where he or she is having conflict. And then that will give you an indicator, or if not an indicator, will inform you as to what needs to happen at the end in terms of being a transformational story. Not all stories are transformational, but if it is, that will give you some insight on watching someone take their dog for a walk. And it's so interesting because who takes who for a walk, right? But we have the idea that the human being is the master, the dog is the pet, the slave. quite clearly could be the other way around. The dog is taking the human for a walk to get him out of that stuffy apartment. You know, the sun never rises and the sun never sets. And we all know this. No one doubts it. And yet, every newspaper, every weather report, every time we communicate, we say sunrise and sunset, even though we know it's a lie. And we have these other things that operate in our day-to-day life that we don't know. We're not cognitively aware that it's a lie, that could possibly be a lie. At the very least, a gray area. And yet we perpetuate it. We keep it going. I want to give a shout out right now to someone who is making this series possible, and her name is Vic, and she is an amazing creative artist, and she is shaping this experience for everyone to enjoy, a sound and video editor. So I want you to know that this is not just me, this is all of us coming together to have this experience and to share what's being shared here. Ultimately, it's not any one person. You know, the guy who passed me today and nodded and smiled and gave me a little good morning, the guy who walks his dogs, who informed our conversation the other day, the crows, even the resistances of things like the bus or a loud motorcycle as they go by on the other street. It all, the man who waters trees, the man who planted the trees, it all adds to the experience that makes the experience the experience. And I also wanted to make sure everyone knows that an amazing sound and video and filmmaker, Vic, is a huge part of all of this coming together so that we can be together. Okay, before we end today, I wanted to encourage everyone to, when it's safe, that's important, put yourself under a tiny amount of pressure and at the same time stay conscious. So what that would look like, or what I just experienced, was walking across the street with traffic, and I wasn't doing it under the guidance of a crosswalk or a signal, a traffic signal. I was just being a maverick and just crossing the street as a row of cars came towards me, a flow of traffic. And I was chatting with you, and at the same moment I went, okay, I'm going to stay conscious, stay aware, and I made a conscious choice to have my left foot go up onto the curb as I crossed the street, because my habituated pattern is to have my right leg, and that's something that we talked about before. And so I did it, and in that moment I actually felt something grow. I felt an awareness increase in terms of handling more complexities in a conscious way. And the walk's over for today, but I do want to talk about this really interesting thing that we all do, and it's very, very subtle when we pass people on the street or in a hallway. So we'll talk about that hopefully tomorrow.